Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I hope that if you're on the East Coast here, you're nice and toasty at home and tuning in. We're so happy to have Dr. Brad Ingrao present tonight. He is a wealth of information, and for the first time, I asked people to post questions on Facebook, and I was pleasantly surprised to see how many people actually did post there. And so we'll get to those questions first. But if you have questions or you think of more questions as we're talking tonight, don't be shy. Just hit that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and I will voice those questions to Brad at the end. And so that becomes part of our transcript as well. I want to start by just thanking Karen Hobbs for providing CART tonight. Karen is with Caption Source. Appreciate it very much, Karen. Okay, so we'll get started. And again, thank you for joining us tonight. We'll get started with the first questions that come in from Linda, who's asking more about hearing aids and cell phones. Is there a type of hearing aid that works well and seamlessly with iPhones or other cell phones? And any new technology that would help us who rely heavily on captioning?
Sure. Let's do the cell phone one first, and then we'll talk about captioning. It's actually a good time to be using hearing aids if you're a heavy cell phone user. The majority of major manufacturers, and when we talk about hearing aid manufacturers, we talk about primarily what we call the big six, GN Resound, Oticon, Phonak, Starkey, Signia, which used to be called Siemens, and Widex. Those big companies, all of them have really focused a lot of attention over the last several years on making that seamless connection to cell phones better. Specifically, a couple of them have really made a partnership with Apple, right? So going backwards, the newest Widex hearing aids are iPhone compatible. Starkey has a couple of iPhone compatible hearing aids. Signia does as well. Oticon has one line that's iPhone compatible. Resound has had iPhone compatibility for several years. And Phonak has just recently released a hearing aid that is allowing for direct connectivity to either an Android or an iPhone. And they call that the SWORD, the SWORD chip. And this is really the thrust for a lot of hearing aids. The majority of hearing aids are moving towards a 2.4 gigahertz, that's capital G, capital H, Z, lowercase z, transmission protocol. And that 2.4 gigahertz is now allowing a lot more flexibility in terms of how we connect to things. So if you've just purchased hearing aids, chances are you've had that option of iPhone connectivity. If you haven't, then there's a lot of options along a very wide price point range. So even entry-level hearing aids from those manufacturers will have iPhone compatibility. Now, there are some other ways to get hearing aids other than those big six. Places like Sam's Club and Costco, some of them are offering those big six manufacturers, which may allow for that direct connectivity. And if they don't allow that direct connectivity, nearly all hearing aids today will at least allow you to connect to a Bluetooth device through maybe a little gateway or something around your neck or a little clip. It's not quite as handy as the direct connect from the iPhone, but it certainly would allow you to have that really important thing, which is when we connect wirelessly to a cell phone, we route the signal to both of our ears. And then hearing that telephone signal through both ears at the same time, for almost everybody, fairly significantly improves how well you understand that. What's also nice about this shift towards this wireless connectivity is cochlear implant users are also able to do this. So if you have a Cochlear brand, cochlear implant processor, the newest one, the 7, the Nucleus 7, you can do a direct connect to an iPhone. If you have a compatible Resound hearing aid, you can actually get it to go to both sides. the newest generation of advanced bionics processors is kind of ready for that upgrade, and that new sword capability will be coming over the next little bit, so that fairly soon, even those advanced bionics users would be able to get a direct connect. Now, all of that being said, if you have a hearing aid or a cochlear implant with a telecoil, which is a really old technology, but it works really well, you can, if your cell phone has a significantly high T rating, so a cell phone will have two numbers, an M rating and a T rating. If the T rating is 3 or 4, chances are if you put that cell phone up to your hearing device, whether it's a cochlear implant, a Baha, or a hearing aid that has a telecoil, switch into telecoil mode, you'll get that good connection. Now, you'll only get it to that side, but if you had something called a neck loop, that would put a little tiny hearing loop around your neck. You could plug that into your cell phone, and now both of your devices on T-coil could in fact get that. Again, not quite as seamless and high-techy as an iPhone talking to your hearing aids from across the room, but even if you have fairly old technology, if you have that telecoil, there really are good ways to get that good binaural sound up to your hearing aids. As far as captioning, there continue to be some advances in technology that you can hold in your hand. If you have access to a real live captioner like we do, there are ways that that caption signal can be sent to your phone. They use that for the Walk for Hearing, in fact. So there's a captioner somewhere off-site, and there's a cell phone, and they're talking into the cell phone, and then everybody in the park can read the captioning live through their smartphones. There are also some attempts at live automated captioning that are on cell phones, like the AVA program. In terms of, I'm talking on the phone, but I want to see captioning in real time live, that's a little harder. And the one that I'm familiar with, and I may not be completely up to date on this, would be the Caption Call. Is it Caption Call or CapTel? One of those two provides a web version on a cell phone. It's not going to be ideal. There's going to be a little delay or a little lag, but those devices and those technologies certainly are there. If you can at all get to an HLAA chapter near you, or particularly if you can get to the HLAA National Convention in Rochester in June, all of that technology will be there. But if you keep on in touch with HLAA through their website, there's also always going to be updates and technology up there.
Good answer. Bear with me, this one is a little bit longer, but it's a good question. Gertrude asks, or says, I've had a progressive sensorineural hearing loss for the past 12 years, and I'm now on my third set of hearing aids, ReSound Lynx. I have a multi-mic, but it isn't helpful on a table at a restaurant, only when clipped to one person's collar. Also, I've tried using it supposedly looped theatrical performance, but I've had no ability to understand the actors, even when wearing my neck loop connected to the multi-mic. Are better assistive listening devices available or coming along? I know hearing in large parties is impossible, but I wish I could manage better in a restaurant with even 3 or 4 friends. Size of devices isn't such a big deal to me, since I would prefer to be able to function better. Thanks.
Sure. Well, first of all, good for you for using a multi-mic. The multi-mic is actually a really interesting device. It's called multi because it's a multiple microphone remote mic. So that's its primary purpose. You point it or you clip it on somebody. The closer that microphone is to the person that you're talking to, the greater what we call signal to noise ratio you'll have. So if this is my speech and this is the background noise, with my hearing aids, it's probably going to be mostly noise and not a lot of speech. If I'm very, very close to the person I'm listening to, the speech might get close to the background noise. But if I put that multi-mic within 3 inches of the person's voice, then all of a sudden, the voice that I want to listen to gets much louder than the background noise. and that gives me a chance to understand. Now, with a severe to profound hearing loss, you may have enough loss of word understanding that no matter what we do, it's still going to be a challenge. But at least if we can make it much less bad, we may not make it better, but we can make it a lot less bad, then that can help. The other reason, the reason they call it the multi-mic, though, is there's other functions of that microphone. The microphone itself is a loop receiver. So if you're in a place that has a loop, an actual hearing loop, then all you need to do is turn on the back of your multi-mic is a little button, and you can scroll down to the T, and that will pick up a loop signal and then transmit it to your hearing aids wirelessly. If you're setting that multi-mic on the table, that's where it starts to have a problem. It's built specifically to orient its microphones based on the position of the microphone. There's a little gyroscope inside. And so if you're clipping it on me, it's going to be vertical. It will be extremely narrow in pickup. If I'm holding it in my hand, which would be good if I was, say, standing at a cocktail party, and I want to talk to 2 or 3 people, I could point it at Nancy or point it at you, and it would have a medium-wide range, and it would pick up 1 person, maybe 2. But it's designed so that when you set it on the table, it picks up all the way around, which is why it fails for you at the dinner table, because it picks up all the background noise. Mm-hmm. There is a product made by another company, Phonak, called the Roger Select microphone. And it's actually got 6 microphones on it. It's a little disc. And what's nice about that is it's designed specifically for this put it on the table thing. And then based on who's got the loudest speech, it tries to automatically steer toward whoever's talking. But what's really nice about it is you can manually select which of those microphones you want to be active. So if Nancy and I are talking and I start to get boring, Nancy can unselect me and select you, and you and Nancy can have a conversation. What's really neat about, now it's small, it's not inexpensive, but it works very well. What's neat about that is even though it's made by Phonak, you can get that microphone and you can get a Roger receiver that will fit into the bottom of your multi-mic. On the bottom of your multi-mic, there's 2 plugs. There's a round plug where you can plug any headphone jack into, and right next to that, there's 3 small holes. That's called a Euro, E-U-R-O plug. If you plug a Roger X receiver into that, then you could use that Roger Select mic. It would send the signal to that Roger X receiver, and then your multi-mic would convert that signal from the Phonak signal to your ReSound hearing aids. So that is the best solution I've seen so far for that sitting around the table kind of a thing. I agree with you that it's really difficult. Now, with what I said earlier about most hearing aid companies moving toward that more standard 2.4 gigahertz system, and also the fact that we now have more companies coming into the hearing aid market through the over-the-counter hearing aid law, we may very well start to attract companies that make really good microphones who have never talked to hearing aids before to be able to say, well, we can agree on 2.4 gigahertz, so we can start to make hearing aid compatible microphones that were originally designed for things like spyware or, you know, movies and really, really good pro audio quality microphones. Companies like Shure, S-U-H-R-E, or Sony, those companies that excel at making microphones for recording and professional use could start to maybe adapt those microphones to our hearing needs, because we're now starting to open up what used to be a very proprietary system. So if you have access to an audiologist who does a fair amount of work with Phonak, you might be able to arrange for one of their sales reps to come when you're there and bring a Roger Select and a Roger X. And then without doing any programming on your hearing aids, you could plug that right into your multi-mic and you can try it out.
That would be great. Now, this is a frequent question that we get. Pam says, is there a hearing aid you can recommend that doesn't cost a fortune? I currently wear Widex brand in both ears, which costs $6,000 8 years ago, so need replacement. Was recently quoted $6,200. With all the technology, I thought there would be a less expensive alternative.
Well, as I say to my students, it depends. If you have a very mild hearing loss, may have been born with two perfectly good hearing aids. Now, people laugh about that, but it actually, if you have a very mild hearing loss, it does help. Here's the reality, and Nancy and I were talking about this earlier. In my experience, most people either have very little difficulty in background noise or a tremendous amount of difficulty in background noise. If you have very little difficulty in background noise, it might be worth your while to spend upwards of the higher end on hearing aids, because the directional microphone systems that are in the higher cost hearing aids are quite sophisticated, and they can give you a lot of ability to kind of move from environment to environment without doing a lot of pushing on your buttons. However, because you're at an HLAA webinar, I suspect that you probably fall into the second category, which is you have a lot of trouble when you're not in a very small room, no more than 3 feet away from the person you're talking to, with perfect lighting, a well-trimmed mustache, no backlight, no background noise, you get the point. So if you're not in a perfect environment and you're struggling a lot, then the chances are that you don't really benefit from a lot of those extra features that make your hearing aid cost a lot more. But in fact, you might benefit more from something like that multi-mic we were just talking about. What I recommend, and there's a webinar that a colleague of mine and I did last year that talks about some other measurement tools that you might ask your audiologist about. Have them do what's called a quick SIN, S-I-N, all caps. That's a speech and noise test. And another one called the AFAB, that's all caps, A-P-H-A-B. That stands for the abbreviated profile of hearing aid benefit. And that will allow your audiologist to see where your biggest difficulty lies. If most of your problem is in quiet environments, then you need a hearing aid. But if most of your difficulty is in background noise or reverberation, and your quick SIN scores are greater than about 10 or 12, the reality is that the hearing aids by themselves are not going to be able to do enough, no matter how much you spend on your hearing aids. And so what you could do is say, look, the most I really want to spend on my hearing system, so stop thinking of it as hearing aids, start thinking of it as a hearing system. I can afford to spend $3,000 on a hearing system. Well, based on those two tests, it's really clear to me that I need a remote microphone of some kind that's going to be flexible, that's going to allow, and those remote microphones are going to cost you anywhere from about $300 to about $1,000, depending on which one. That's Rogers Select is pretty expensive, but even though, if that was your primary need, then you spend your money there, and then you subtract that from your budget. Because if you don't have a lot of problem in background noise, even the quote unquote entry-level hearing aids today are far superior than the premium hearing aids 15 years ago. And the entry-level hearing aid today might be very, very similar to the premium hearing aid you bought 8 years ago. But if you add to that, making sure that you have a telecoil, and you add to that a really flexible remote microphone, then all of a sudden what happens is, if you think about your listening capabilities as a bubble with just your hearing aids, I don't care how much you spend on your hearing aids, your bubble is about 6 feet across. If you want to expand your bubble to more difficult situations or greater distances, you're going to need things like remote microphones, telecoils, hearing loops. And so if you really need those, which it sounds like you do, spend your money, start spending your money there. And then whatever's left over, even if you buy a hearing aid that your audiologist says is entry level or mid-range, chances are it's really going to work well for you in those quiet environments. And no matter how much you spend, it's not going to be enough anyway for that middle piece. So you might as well go easy or difficult, and that's where most people fall. So that way, your remote microphone, your other systems that you have, your neck loop, all your accessories, maybe a TV listener, put your money there and then work backwards. I would rather see you spend $4,000 on a total system that included an entry level or a mid-priced set of hearing aids, a remote microphone, maybe a TV streaming device, a telecoil. I'd rather see that than have you spend $7,000 on 2 hearing aids and still not be able to deal with all of those other things that those smaller devices and less expensive devices will help you out with.
Good advice. Tony says, today's hearing aids are basically small digital computers that fit over or into our ears and are not visible. A major constraining factor that increases price and decreases performance has been the need to miniaturize the technology to meet this goal. With folks walking around now with large Bluetooth devices, earbuds, and headphones on their ears now, I would think that the need to make hearing aids invisible would be a thing of the past. Why are hearing aid companies not producing larger devices that are not limited by this difficult size constraint? These could be larger devices that fit on the ear, or even a computer about the size of a deck of playing cards that would attach to the clothing somewhere. Not sure we want to go there, but the Bose Hearphone is certainly one such device utilizing this strategy. Why are hearing aid companies not adapting a similar strategy? Do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, I do. Partly because they're not seeing enough people like you ponying up and buying big devices. So what ends up happening is every fiscal year, they look at what devices did we sell and which ones did we not sell. Now, part of it has to do with people like me, audiologists who are afraid to change the way we've always done things. There's a certain predictability in how hearing aids have sold, which hearing aids have sold. And I do believe that we're kind of on the beginning cusp of a potential new group of hearing aid users like yourself, but it's going to take a really large number of people who say to a hearing aid company, you know what, I would absolutely buy your hearing aid if it wasn't so darn small. And I just don't think we're there yet. But what's interesting, and you mentioned the Bose product, with the beginnings of the over-the-counter hearing aid classification, we will start to see alternative options. In technology, they call these disrupting influences. So we will start to see people who say, look, I really have a problem in background noise, like the last question. I might be willing to wear something around my neck if they gave me 6 or 8 really good microphones. If I could really hear better and it said Bose on the side of it, then nobody would give me a second look. That may be a thing that's going to force my profession to take a good hard look at what we think we know about you all. And I do think that some of what you're saying is true, but I don't think so much it's the size necessarily, because even very small hearing aids can now be wireless. So we can still use these remote microphones and so forth, but it will take a strong statement of actual purchases to convince people who have been doing things a certain way. I just had another HLAA all-star named Neil Bauman come into my class for a guest lecture on his hearing aid museum yesterday. And, you know, all the way back to ear trumpets, they were trying to figure out a way to hide these things. And so for hundreds of years, literally, what has turned out to be the good sellers are the hearing aids that we can make not look like hearing aids. So I agree with you 100% in theory. In practice, it really is going to be up to every one of you all to start calling hearing aid companies and audiologists and saying, I'm ready to buy a hearing aid, but if it's smaller than a pack of cards, I don't want it.
Okay, Lisa says, I have progressive hearing loss, and now at 57, my loss is beyond profound. I can't hear at all without my hearing aids. However, I have a non-typical loss and have only had 2 sets of hearing aids in my lifetime, because when I go to an audiologist, the process is so frustrating, I give up. My brain has learned to hear in a certain way, and especially at my age, which, by the way, is not old.
I was going to say the same thing.
Typical predetermined settings are unusable to me. The last time I upgraded, I went through 7 audiologists before finding one that understood my issue and really worked hard to program the aids, different for both ears, to what was comfortable for me. That audiologist has since retired. My aids are over 15 years old and definitely need replacing, but I'm balking at the prospect of going through the process. I find that most audiologists simply aren't interested in fitting my loss, which is a difficult process and not the easy money of fitting a mild loss. Help.
Okay. I definitely feel for you. I've kind of said this exact thing to some students fairly recently. And my uncle, who began life as a professional musician and ended his life as a deaf hearing aid dispenser, used to tell me this kind of thing, that we have to fit the hearing loss, not the audiogram. And Mark Ross has said the same thing, and Charles Berlin has said the same thing. When you look at the way we are taught to fit hearing aids, it is all based on research, and the research is based on typical average types of hearing loss. And so all of our mathematical formulas, all of our assumptions, all of the things that we think should work generally don't work if your hearing loss is significantly atypical. And I would guess, you didn't say it in your question, but I would guess maybe your hearing loss is more on the low frequencies and less in the highs, or it has a shape that's confounding the math. And so when our math breaks down, because unfortunately, a lot of our work has been focused on how can we get the majority of people to hear speech well, that's where all of our tools of measurement come from. And so when your audiologist who finally figures it out retires, it's really kind of difficult. The only thing I would suggest, and they may or may not be willing to do it, but I would suggest contacting your retired audiologist and saying, look, can I pay you a couple $100 to write an essay, a paper, a brief on how you fit my hearing aids that I can give to another audiologist so that they can understand, hey, like a letter of introduction. This is my patient. This is what's different about their hearing loss. We tried this, this, and this, and where we ended up with was here. This is why, this is how, and this is how it worked out for her. Personally, if somebody walked into my office with that, I would say, thank you so much. You just saved us both a lot of aggravation. I can't speak for everybody, but certainly I don't think any of us like to have patients that we cannot help. I hear what you're saying about the quick and easy money of a mild loss. To some extent, that's true. I don't believe that's the motivation of the majority of people who get in this field. But I do feel like there is some value in having that transfer of what we call institutional knowledge. It's like when you buy an old house. You want to buy an old house and you want to talk to the old owner, not just the real estate guy. Because the old owner knows how you have to jiggle the toilet to make it stop running. And in your case, you have a hearing loss that you have already worked out all of the idiosyncrasies of, and you have come up with a way to make it successful. Now, if that were not available, if you could not get that information, what I would personally do, and you can ask the next audiologist to do, is, hey, before you do anything, do a comprehensive electroacoustic analysis of my hearing aids. Don't change anything, just measure them. Measure them with a test box, do real ear measurements in my ears with my ear molds of different types of signals and see if we can reverse engineer this thing. But ideally, and in your case, I think the only way you're going to make it happen is to get that old audiologist to write a letter of introduction to your hearing loss And I would offer them about $200 or $300 for that, because it's a lot of valuable information and it's going to take them a couple hours to do.
Isn't real ear measurement supposed to help you program the hearing aids to, so to the levels that are comfortable? Isn't that?
Yes, yes. However, the algorithms that were built sometimes don't get it right for these atypical losses, because when the algorithms were fine-tuned, they have lots and lots and lots of patients who had those similar kinds of losses, and it's mostly sloping toward the high frequencies.
Okay.
So the algorithms get you in the ballpark, but particularly if she's had hearing aids for a very long time, she may be bridging big technology changes of the hearing aids. And she's absolutely right. She hears the way she hears. Her brain is wired. Now, all of that said, if you're at the level of severe to profound, if you're really out of the woods completely without your hearing aids, I hope you've had a cochlear implant evaluation, because it's possible that a cochlear implant could allow you to hear much better. You're going to have to rewire your brain significantly, but you're very young for a cochlear implant in terms of rewiring the brain. And the amount of time and effort it will take to get another new hearing aid fitting working correctly, depending on how well you do with your current hearing aid, if there's a maximum performance of under 40 or 50% word understanding with the best hearing aid fitting you have, you have a potential to do much, much better than that with a cochlear implant over time. So I would encourage you, as you're seeking out this next audiologist, to also seek out a cochlear implant evaluation so that you have all your options on the table in front of you.
That's good advice. Barbara said, my grandmother and I are researching new hearing devices like PSAPs. She has severe hearing loss in both ears, but is unable to afford thousands of dollars of hearing aids. Her Medicare coverage won't cover hearing aids either. So we were looking at PSAPs as a potential option. What would you advise? Is there a type of PSAP that you think is a good product, any to avoid? I think the key might be severe hearing loss there, right?
Yeah. So technically, PSAPs are not designed to improve hearing. Legally, they're not allowed to say, we make hearing better. Technically, the way that the PSAP rule is written, PSAPs are designed for environmental listening to the birds, blah, 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 blah. Okay. In reality, a lot of PSAPs, especially the higher end PSAPs, can provide some amplification for mild to moderate hearing loss. Severe hearing loss, now we're running into some issues. I am not aware of a PSAP currently that's going to do a good job with a severe loss. So cost is certainly a factor. I'm with you on that. What I might suggest is a couple of things. First of all, again, as I said to the other gentleman, severe loss to me also says more than average difficulty in more difficult environments. So spending less money on a hearing aid and more on those accessories might be a solution. The other possibility, it's not a cosmetically elegant solution, but it might be a good hearing solution, and it might be an affordable solution, is something as simple as an amplifier, like a Pocket Talker or a Comfort Duet. These are around $150-ish at places like Harris Communication or Hark Mercantile, or if you come to the HLAA convention, they're on sale there. But these are designed not to be prescribed, but it's a general amplifier. Now, you wear earphones or earbuds with these, and so you look like everybody else walking around on the street. And it's kind of like an older looking body aid, but here's where it gets interesting. You can put a very directional microphone on these. And so if you're willing to do some logistical work, you might actually be able to address a lot of your problems for like $300 or $400. Another option to look at is places like Costco and Sam's Club. They are doing a better job all the time. They're providing good quality hearing aids that can be fit according to prescriptive formulas, that can be adjusted. And while they're not going to be $300, they're not going to be $5,000. So it's a big thing. Now, with a lot of work from HLAA, last year we had a passage of the over-the-counter hearing aid law. This is still kind of designed for that mild to moderate range. So unfortunately, with a severe loss, neither the PSAP nor the over-the-counter is really a good option for you. What might be something to seriously look for is if you have a university program near you. Oftentimes, the university programs will have a much lower cost system for you, but there are also some charities out there that can help with the cost of hearing aids. HLAA, I'm not sure, Nancy, if they still have all that contact information or not. I don't keep track of all of them, but if you contact HLAA and say, look, I really need some financial assistance with getting hearing aids, they might be able to connect you to some folks. The Lions Club has often done help. They tend to focus more on kids, but some of your service organizations might be able to help out. There are some financing options out there, but they're kind of, some of them are tricky because it's like 1 year, no interest, but then day 367, it's 40% interest. So be careful of that kind of stuff. I really don't think you need to spend $6,000 on a pair of hearing aids. You could probably do very well with much less on the hearing aid side and more on the microphone side. If there's an HLAA chapter in your area, please contact them, and you can find them on the HLAA national website. See if they have what's called an HAT, a HAT demonstration. In Long Beach, California, once a month, they have a room full of all of this stuff where you can go in and try it all out. And then if you find something that works for you, they have catalogs and all of that kind of stuff. If you can't find that locally, contact HLAA. Maybe they can help find a member that's close by. And if you can get up to Rochester this summer, do it, because that's like Disneyland for people with hearing loss. Anything and everything you need is there, plus, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of people who know exactly what you're going through.
Mm-hmm. You're our biggest fan. Thank you for that, Brad, for that pitch.
Well, I'll tell you what, here's why I'm your biggest fan, Nancy. In 1988, I started my graduate program in audiology. And I went to my first SHHH meeting there. And I continue to learn every time I go to an HLAA meeting. And so I feel like if I can learn something with this thick head, anybody can. And you got to just go, you got to go where your people are. Mm-hmm. And that's where your people are. So,
yeah, I like to say it's like a big family reunion because there's people there that quickly become like your family, and your family doesn't understand you. So,
and unlike most family reunions, if your battery dies in the middle of something, all you got to do is go, you got one, you got one. You just put up a sign at like 312 and 17 people will throw batteries at you. So it's easy.
Also, if you're looking for financial assistance, in the hearing help section of our website is where the financial assistance is, but we're happy to help if you'd like to give us a call. Woody says, I have Meniere's disease, a phonak-NAIDA aid in my left ear, and a nucleus 7 cochlear implant in the right ear. It has been 15 months since the implant. The left ear has severe hearing loss and cannot understand speech anymore, but it does assist the cochlear somewhat. My problem is that the cochlear can only hear speech when there is a single person talking and no extraneous noise such as music and TV. Also, I cannot differentiate voices based on their frequencies. Most people sound the same. All this makes life rather lonesome. I do listen to audio courses in the car. I speculate my audiologist is not capable of understanding my problems and implementing proper adjustments. I live in the Chicago area. How would you recommend I proceed?
Well, if we were live with Woody, I would ask a couple of important questions. How long did you have hearing loss before you got your first hearing aids?
Woody, I think Woody is in the webinar. If he'd like to answer by chat, we might be able to find the answers to that.
Okay. If he is, that's important.
Okay.
The second question we need to know from you, Woody, is how long did hearing aids really help you? So how long has it been before you got the implant that the hearing was so bad that you were really struggling with hearing aids? The third thing I need to know is how old you are. And then it sounds like you're doing some pretty good, what we call passive listening exercises. But I'll be honest with you, unless you surprise me with those answers, 15 months is not that long for what you're talking about. Typically what we'll see is, and when I was at the VA, I ran the cochlear implant program in Long Beach. For a typical veteran, we would have guys who were maybe 70 years old. So their brains are still pretty flexible, but they're not as flexible and fast as they were when they were 50. And they had hearing loss for maybe 30 or 40 years before they got their first hearing aids. And then their hearing aids crapped out on them about 10 years ago. So that was kind of my worst case scenario guy. And they would be where you are at about 2 years, 15 months to 2 years. They're still struggling. They can hear okay one-to-one in a quiet room, but background noise, forget about it. And everything kind of still sounds the same. Now, if you were a perfect candidate, you would have a very short time, maybe you're 60 years old, you identified your hearing loss at 40, you got hearing aids right away, you wore them, and only 2 years ago you had a real big drop in hearing. At that point, if you were the perfect candidate, I would expect that in about a year, you would be able to have an easy conversation, one-to-one, and you'd start to be able to have a pretty good sense of whose voice you were talking about. But it would still take you another 6 to 12 months to really function decently in background noise. But even then, you're going to need remote microphones. You're going to need some help. You're going to need to use loops. So I don't think it's anything that your audiologist needs to adjust, quite frankly. I think, as frustrating as it sounds for me to say, you're still kind of in that upward growth pattern. Now, a way to know for sure is you should have at 15 months have had your annual checkup, and they should have done that AZ Bio sentence test again, at least with quiet, maybe with background noise. If they've been doing that every 3 to 6 months and you've been getting better and better and better, and you're up at around 85 or 90% understanding in quiet, then I would expect the background noise performance to start to come up in the next 6 months or so. However, if you're still climbing, if you're at 70% in quiet and you're still climbing, we have to really wait for that to get the best it's going to get. And then we expect the background noise to trail after that. It'll never be as good as in quiet, but it'll get better. Then here's the other thing you can do to speed that up. You're listening to the audio books in the car. Fantastic. You're stimulating that implant. That's good. Now it's time to do the second level of your exercise. What I want you to do is at home, I want you to listen to those books at home. And I want you to get in a quiet room, and I want you to listen to an audio book while you have the book in front of you. And I want you to get to the point where in a quiet room with a speaker about 3 feet from you, you get every word right off, no problem at all. Then I want you to turn the TV on to the news. And I want you to turn it up just till it's loud enough to begin to interfere with your ability to understand the audiobook. And do that for a week. What you'll notice is it'll start to get easier to hear the book over the noise. When it gets easy to hear the book, turn the TV volume up again until it's almost impossible to hear the book. And keep fighting. It's like doing push-ups. You got to keep doing more. When you can do 20, you can't stop at 20. Eventually, you got to do 25. So As the it gets easier with the background noise, you keep making the background noise more, and your brain is going to start to equalize, and ladder by ladder you'll go. If you do that for maybe 30, 40 minutes every day, in 6 months, you should see some pretty significant improvement. I don't tend to make a lot of adjustments in hearing aids for that. Now, the only other thing that might help out is if your Phonak hearing aid is getting ready to be replaced, you might want to consider a ReSound hearing aid that would be compatible with the accessory that you have for your N7. You should have had opportunities to get different accessories, and if one of the accessories you got was the Mini Mic 2 Plus, that's exactly the same as that multi-mic we talked about before. If you have a ReSound Enzo 3D or Enzo Quattro, either one of those, that will, and I'll tell you something, the Enzo 3D will be cheaper because it's older, but it'll still work. You can couple both of those to the same multi-mic. You can also pair both of those to your iPhone or iPad. So if you use the iPad, you can also do like TED Talks on YouTube. They have captioning. You can watch it once with the captioning. The captioning is actually done post-production on TED Talks, so it's very accurate and it's very well synchronized. Then you turn off the captioning, you do it again. When you get really good hearing it without the captioning while you're streaming through your devices, you turn on the TV news and you start to fight with the noise. If you do that exercise routinely every day and you keep making it harder, you will see improvements, and your audiologist isn't doing anything wrong.
Would you recommend the online rehab courses such as?
Yeah, absolutely. You can certainly do. Cochlear has online resources. All the manufacturers do. But since you're already kind of in a habit of doing the audiobooks, I would say do the audiobooks. Just make it harder for yourself.
Okay, but is there any way that you can get captioning for, like podcasts and things like that are really popular?
Well, the challenge again is audio quality. So if the podcast has excellent audio quality, you potentially could use something like the Ava app. But it's tough. I would start with what we already have that's good quality, good production value. TED Talks are great because there's so many different topics. Mm-hmm. You can pretty much find something that you're interested in, and you get a good, you feed your brain, but you also get really good auditory stimulation. And if you have devices that can stream, then you can go right from the device, direct connect. You get the best audio signal. But the key really is you have to keep making it harder for yourself. So Woody, it's not an ear thing. It's not an implant thing. It's not a programming thing. It's a time and brain thing.
Okay. Carol says, my hearing loss is borderline moderate severe, and audiologists have said it's not bad enough for a CI. Yet as my friends get CIs, they find they are far more effective than hearing aids. The two situation in aids, even with supplemental mics, hardly help at all, or with background noise, as in restaurants or large meetings where people are more than 8 feet apart. Are CIs more effective in those situations?
Well, yes and no. First of all, when you say that audiologists have said it's not bad enough for a CI, I hope what you mean is you've had a formal cochlear implant evaluation and you did not meet the criteria. If what you mean is my hearing aid audiologist looked at my audiogram and said it's not bad enough yet, that may or may not be correct. Cochlear implant inclusion criteria has changed fairly dramatically in the last 10 years and even some in the last 5 years. It's not about your audiogram anymore, it's about your word understanding. What you're describing to me, I would be very surprised, unless you have really good fill in the gap skills, that you would pass a cochlear implant evaluation. So I would recommend, if you haven't had a formal cochlear implant evaluation with somebody who currently does cochlear implants, and the easy way to find that is go online and you go to each cochlear implant manufacturer and it says find a clinic. And that'll find somebody locally and you can make an appointment for an evaluation. with all that you're saying, cochlear implants don't by themselves magically fix all your problems. What they will provide for you, again, like I said to Woody, it's going to take 9 to 18 months, depending on a lot of stuff. It will provide you the ability in almost every case to have a conversation in quiet at 1 meter, 3 feet, with a high degree of understanding. So you will understand many more words. Now, when you get into a background noise situation, you will understand fewer words than you do in quiet, but you still should understand more words than you did with your hearing aids. If you couple that to the remote microphones that you're already using, there is a strong possibility that you will have more success in those noisy environments. However, there will always be a situation where you are in so much background noise that is so complex that no technology, even unimpaired ears, will allow you to have a conversation. So if you live anywhere that has chain restaurants and you go into Red Lobster or Olive Garden, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you should be able to do pretty well. And you'll do better with an implant probably than you do with your hearing aids. If you go into that same restaurant Friday night at 7:30, I don't care what you're wearing, you ain't gonna hear well. It's just not gonna happen. So part of it is understanding the actual limitations of the devices that you're wearing. And if you're relying only on the devices on your head, realistically, your bubble of effective hearing in noise is gonna be about 3 to 4 feet. 6, 8 feet, you're bringing in a lot of background noise. And so the effectiveness of the directional microphone starts to spread out and you just don't do as well. So a big part of it is get away from the noise the best you can. If you double the distance between you and the background noise becomes 1/4 as loud. So that really improves that signal to noise ratio for you. So sometimes it's just as simple as looking around the restaurant and saying, we want to sit over there. Or, hey, it's kind of nice out. Can we sit on the patio tonight? Those little things will really improve the opportunity for you to have success. But it sounds to me like you need a current cochlear implant evaluation. And I would expect that you will probably do well. But I will throw another plug in, get to an HLAA meeting. There's a lot of other people like you who don't have implants and some who do, and maybe just learning a few tricks can help as well.
Mm-hmm. In the interest of time, since we only have about 7 minutes left, I just want to say if we don't get to your questions, the ones that have been posted on Facebook, Brad has promised to go back and answer the questions there.
Yep.
So I'm going to just turn to the questions that have been answered or asked in the Q&A.
Okay.
And to kind of get on a different topic, Teresa asks, I have Meniere's disease. Any comments or suggestions on hearing fluctuations, how to cope with those?
Yeah, they can be pretty wide and pretty drastic. And some people will have big changes in volume, and some people will have changes in discrimination. The volume changes aren't terribly hard for us to help you with if you have a pattern. If you have a good day and a medium day and a bad day, and those are pretty repeatable, you can try very hard to get make an arrangement with your audiologist to say, I got to come in for a quick hearing test on these 3 days. If you can identify what those big changes in volume are, your audiologist can make you separate programs in your hearing aids so that you can have a group of programs when you're having a good day, a medium day, and a bad day. If your difficulty is discrimination and it changes, that's your big change, which can happen with Meniere's. There's unfortunately not a ton we can do from a hearing aid perspective, but I think the biggest thing that may help you and your audiologist is if you can try to find a way to document the range of hearing that you have with your Meniere's. And I know it's hard because you tend to have big changes when your Meniere's is more active, when you're more likely to have more really debilitating tinnitus and really debilitating vertigo. But if you can work it out and identify that, The other way that you can do it, if you can't do that and your big change is volume, ask your audiologist for the maximum volume control range in your hearing aid. And then at least you can do that the best you can. Some hearing aids have the ability to do a little bit of frequency shaping as well through apps. So you can talk to your audiologist about that.
Okay. Vicki would like to know, why can't audiologists have demo hearing aids from several manufacturers on hands? There's 3 different brands that she'd like to try, just for the specific features that they offer before deciding on one. And then, if you do try one and maybe return it after a trial, what does the manufacturer do with that?
Well, demo hearing aids are available, and depending on your relationship with the manufacturer, you can either get them or buy them, and I would often do that. Those are hearing aids that we would keep in the office, and if it's not a custom hearing aid, then it's changing the ear mold. We can use the same hearing aid on your ear mold. We would sanitize it in between times, but it's possible to do that. If that's really important to you, finding an audiologist that's willing to do that is a conversation to have. It's less common than it used to be, but it's still possible. So have that conversation with your audiologist. And worst came to worst, you can come to the HLAA National Convention where all the hearing aid manufacturers will be. And believe it or not, you can try some hearing aids there. It's a very short trial. What you're looking for is a longer trial period. Obviously, in any state, you can buy a hearing aid. If it doesn't work out, you can exchange it or return it within 30 to 45 days. That's a lot less of what you're looking for. The other way to do it where you may have more access to that is through a university program. We get demos all the time because they want our students to learn about these hearing aids. So a university program might be helpful. If you go to the American Academy of Audiology, that's audiology.org, or the American Speech Language Hearing Association, that's ASHA.org, ASHA.org. Both of them have listings of audiology programs. So you could find one locally and see if they have demos.
Okay. Linda says, I live in South Florida. How does one go about finding a good audiologist that's not in it for the sale? Try to find an audiologist to help her hear her best. So that's a common question that we get, Brad. How do you go about finding a really good audiologist? I know they exist.
Well, there's this university in Fort Lauderdale that has a Doctor of Audiology program that has a guy, but we also have a lot of other good faculty, and we have some really great students. So we're right in Fort Lauderdale. But how you do it is you interview us like you would interview anybody else. If you can identify what your primary difficulties are, there's a tool called, I talked about earlier, the AFAB. You can go online and download that for free. It's if you just Google AFAB, it'll take you to the University of Memphis website where the hearing aid research lab is, and you can download the AFAB, fill it out for yourself, and call somebody up and say, hey, here's my AFAB scores. What would you do? And if they say, what's an AFAB? You say, thanks very much for your time. You hang up the phone. But you have to interview us. Now, you might not be able to get me on the phone, but you say, you know what? This is really important to me. This is going to probably be my second largest purchase aside from my house and my car, right? So you could say, look, I'm really interested I'm looking for a new audiologist. Can I pay you $100 for half an hour of your time to ask you some questions? And you can come in and find out if we're worth our salt. You can look at Google reviews. You can contact your local HLAA chapter. But realistically, you got to come in and talk to us. You have to ask us questions, and you have to see what our response is. So finding a good audiologist depends a lot on your hearing problem and your experience and what your needs are. But ultimately, we all have to make a dime, but we don't have to make a lot of dimes. We got to make a living. We don't have to make a killing.
The Hearing Tracker seems to be a good resource. Would you agree?
I would agree. Hearing Tracker is really good. It's kind of the Consumer Reports of the hearing industry, and it's taken hearing aid evaluation and hearing aid service delivery evaluation to a really nice level. So Hearing Tracker is a good resource. It gives you some questions to think about. HLAA has a checklist of things you should ask and talk to your audiologist about. But yeah, I mean, I agree. It's difficult. It's difficult.
Last question.
The same questions every year when we do these
right. Last question, and we'll be real quick, Karen. I know we've reached 9 o'clock, but Jan would like to know, is there a hearing aid offered by Costco that would be best for a severe cookie bite type of hearing loss?
It's been a while since I looked at the Costco offerings, but I believe they still have a pretty good range, and they still have the Phonak line that they had. With a cookie bite, it kind of depends on where it cookie bites. For those who don't know, a cookie bite loss is where you have the worst hearing in the middle, and so you may have moderate loss in the highs and the low pitches, but more severe in the middle. And as long as the hearing aid has enough adjustment channels and they're in the right place to kind of track your audiogram, you should be able to do very well with the majority of things that are available at Costco. Because again, even today's low-end hearing aids far surpass the capabilities of what I was selling as premium hearing aids 10 years ago. It's more about the audiologist understanding your loss and being able to work with you to maybe say, that prescription is going to be a little bit more of a ballpark than if you had a more typical loss, but it'll get us started. And then using maybe tools like the AFAB and some other ways of looking at your lifestyle, they can fine tune that. But certainly I don't see any reason why you should not be able to get, if you have a good practitioner, to get a good fit from what they have to offer, because they have a pretty wide range of products.
Okay. Thank you, Brad. This has been most informative. I like this format of question and answer. And again, if you didn't hear us answer your question, Brad has promised to go back into the Facebook event on the HLA Facebook page and answer your questions. I will try to have the recording of this webinar posted by midweek, probably next week.
Okay.
And then you can replay it all you want and share it with your chapter or whoever else you would like. And again, thank you to Karen for providing CART tonight. And thanks again, Brad. It's been great.
Sure. And Nancy, if there were questions left in the Q&A queue that we didn't get to, feel free to post those on Facebook. I'll get to those as well.
I think we got through all of those.
Okay, good. And then if it's possible, I'm happy to do this either more often or for a longer time. These are fun.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
No problem.
All right.
Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for the good questions.